I never thought shoveling my driveway at 5 in the morning would land me in a courtroom, but when you live in Ridgewood Estates in suburban Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the Homeowners Association makes sure every minute of your life falls under their microscopic scrutiny. The snow had started falling around midnight on that frigid January evening, and by the time my alarm went off at 4:45, nearly 8 inches blanketed everything in sight. I'm Isaac Morrison, a 34-year-old accountant who works from home most days, but that particular Thursday I had an important client meeting downtown at 7:30. The weather forecast had been calling for this storm all week, and I knew if I didn't clear my driveway early, I'd be stuck spinning my tires and missing the meeting that could make or break my quarterly numbers. I pulled on my heavy winter coat, yanked my boots over 2 pairs of wool socks, and grabbed my snow shovel from the garage. The cold air hit my face like a slap as I stepped outside, my breath forming thick clouds in front of me. The street was silent except for the scraping sound my shovel made against the concrete. Most of my neighbors were still asleep, their houses dark except for the occasional porch light cutting through the swirling snow. I worked methodically, clearing a path from my garage to the street, then widening it so I could actually maneuver my car out without getting stuck. My muscles burned from the effort, and sweat gathered under my layers despite the freezing temperature. By 6:15, my driveway was clear, the snow piled neatly on both sides. I went back inside, showered quickly, grabbed my briefcase, and made it to my meeting with 20 minutes to spare. That's when I thought everything was fine. That's when I thought I'd made a smart decision, being proactive and responsible. I had no idea that Patricia Whitmore, the president of the Ridgewood Estates Homeowners Association, had been watching from her window 3 houses down. The letter arrived in my mailbox 2 days later. It was printed on official HOA letterhead, with the Ridgewood Estates logo embossed at the top in gold foil. I opened it while standing at my kitchen counter, still in my work clothes, a cup of coffee growing cold beside me. "Dear Mr. Morrison," it began in that peculiar formal tone that HOA correspondence always seems to adopt. "It has come to our attention that on Thursday, January 9th, at approximately 5:30 in the morning, you were observed clearing snow from your driveway. According to Section 7.4, Paragraph C of the Ridgewood Estates Community Guidelines, all snow removal activities, including shoveling, snow blowing, and plowing, must be conducted between the hours of 8 in the morning and 8 in the evening to preserve the peace and quiet enjoyment of all residents. This violation has resulted in a fine of $250, due within 30 days of the date of this letter. Failure to pay will result in additional penalties and possible legal action. Sincerely, Patricia Whitmore, HOA President." I read the letter 3 times, certain I was missing something. A fine for clearing snow too early. I pulled out my copy of the Community Guidelines, a thick binder I'd received when I bought the house 2 years ago but had barely glanced at since. Sure enough, buried in the middle of page 73, there it was. Section 7.4, Paragraph C, exactly as quoted in the letter. The thing is, I'm not usually the type to fight City Hall or, in this case, the HOA. I pay my dues on time. I keep my lawn trimmed to the acceptable height. I've never painted my house a non-approved color or installed a mailbox that didn't match the neighborhood aesthetic. But $250 for shoveling my driveway before work. That seemed insane, even by HOA standards. I decided to attend the next board meeting, which according to the schedule posted in the neighborhood newsletter, was set for the following Tuesday at 7 in the evening at the community center. I'd never been to one before, and I imagined it would be a small gathering where reasonable people could discuss reasonable concerns. The community center was a modest building near the entrance to our development, with a large meeting room that could probably hold 100 people. When I arrived at 6:55, about 30 residents were already seated in folding chairs arranged in neat rows. Patricia Whitmore sat at a table at the front of the room, flanked by 4 other board members. She was exactly what you'd picture when you hear the term HOA president, a woman in her early 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair that looked like it had been shellacked in place, wearing a cream-colored blazer over a silk blouse, her reading glasses hanging from a beaded chain around her neck. I took a seat in the back row and waited. The meeting started precisely at 7, and Patricia called it to order with a firm rap of a gavel that seemed unnecessarily dramatic. They went through the usual business, approving the minutes from the last meeting, discussing the budget for spring landscaping, debating whether to install new playground equipment at the park. It was all mind-numbingly boring, and I found myself checking my phone every few minutes. Finally, at 7:45, Patricia asked if there was any new business from residents. I raised my hand. "Yes, Mr. Morrison," she said, and I noticed she didn't need to consult a list to know my name. She'd obviously been expecting me. I stood up, holding the letter. I received a fine for clearing my driveway too early last Thursday. I wanted to discuss this because it seems like an unreasonable rule, especially considering I had to get to work. Patricia's smile was tight and condescending. "Mr. Morrison, the rules in our community guidelines exist for a reason. They were established by previous boards and ratified by a vote of the residents. We cannot simply ignore them because they're inconvenient." "I understand that," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "But $250 seems excessive for shoveling snow before 8 in the morning. I wasn't making excessive noise. I was just using a regular shovel." "The amount of the fine is also stipulated in the guidelines," Patricia said. "And the rule exists because we've had complaints in the past about early morning noise disturbances. Not everyone works the same schedule, Mr. Morrison. Some of our residents work night shifts and need to sleep during the day." "But it was a Thursday morning," I protested. "And I had a work obligation. Plus, the city has a snow ordinance that requires residents to clear their sidewalks within 12 hours of the snow stopping. If I waited until 8 in the morning, I would have been cutting it close, and I might not have been able to get my car out in time." That's when another board member spoke up, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses named Gerald Peterson. "The city ordinance you're referring to requires sidewalks to be cleared, not driveways. There's a difference." "But my driveway connects to the sidewalk," I said. "And regardless, the city encourages prompt snow removal for safety reasons." Patricia cut in, her voice sharper now. "Mr. Morrison, we appreciate your concerns, but the board has already reviewed your case, and the fine stands. If you wish to propose a change to the rule, you may submit a formal petition with signatures from at least 20% of the homeowners, and we will consider it at a future meeting. But the fine for your violation remains in effect." I felt my face getting hot. 20% of the homeowners. That was over 60 signatures. "This is ridiculous," I said, louder than I intended. "You're punishing people for being responsible." "Mr. Morrison," Patricia said, standing up now, "I understand you're upset, but this meeting is not the appropriate forum for this kind of outburst. If you cannot conduct yourself appropriately, I'll have to ask you to leave." I sat back down, my hands shaking with frustration. The meeting continued for another 15 minutes, covering some trivial matter about trash can placement, and then everyone filed out. Several neighbors avoided making eye contact with me as they left, though one older man patted my shoulder and whispered, Good for you for speaking up. Over the next week, I couldn't stop thinking about the fine. $250 wasn't going to bankrupt me, but it was the principle of the thing. I started doing research, diving into Wisconsin state law, Milwaukee County ordinances, and specifically the municipal snow removal requirements. That's when I found it. The city of Milwaukee has an ordinance, Municipal Code Section 7511, that requires property owners to clear snow and ice from their sidewalks within 12 hours after the snow has stopped falling. Failure to comply can result in fines from the city. But here's the kicker. The ordinance explicitly states that property owners must have reasonable opportunity to comply, and that the city recognizes the need for prompt snow removal to ensure public safety. More importantly, I found a Wisconsin state statute that addresses conflicts between HOA rules and municipal ordinances. It clearly states that when an HOA rule conflicts with a municipal law, the municipal law takes precedence. If the HOA's rule about snow removal hours prevented residents from complying with the city's 12-hour requirement, then the HOA rule was effectively invalid. I printed out all the relevant statutes and ordinances, highlighted the pertinent sections, and wrote a detailed letter to the HOA board explaining why their fine was unjust and why their rule violated municipal law. I sent it via certified mail so I'd have proof of delivery. The response came 10 days later. It was brief and dismissive. Dear Mr. Morrison, we have reviewed your correspondence regarding the fine issued for your violation of community guidelines. After consultation with our legal counsel, we maintain that our community rules do not conflict with municipal ordinances, as they regulate different aspects of property maintenance. Your fine remains in effect, and failure to pay by the due date will result in additional penalties. Sincerely, the Ridgewood Estates HOA Board. I called my brother that evening. Daniel is a lawyer, though he specializes in corporate law, not HOA disputes. Still, I figured he might have some insight. They're being idiots, Daniel said after I explained the situation. But unfortunately, idiots with a legal structure behind them. You could pay the fine and move on, or you could fight it. Fighting it means small claims court, probably some legal fees and a lot of your time and energy. But I'm right, aren't I asked. Their rule does conflict with the city ordinance. On paper, you have a decent argument, Daniel admitted. The question is whether a judge will see it that way. HOAs have a lot of leeway in how they govern their communities. But the state statute about municipal law taking precedence is pretty clear. You might actually have a case. Would you represent me? I asked. Daniel laughed. I would if I thought I'd ever be able to visit you again without everyone in your neighborhood giving me dirty looks. But seriously, for something like this, you don't need a corporate attorney. You need someone who knows property law and municipal regulations. I can recommend someone. That's how I ended up in the office of Helen Sanders, a property attorney with 15 years of experience dealing with HOA disputes. Her office was in downtown Milwaukee, in one of those older buildings with high ceilings and wood paneling that made everything feel more serious and official. Helen was in her early 40s, with short dark hair and a no-nonsense demeanor that I immediately appreciated. She listened to my story, reviewed all my documentation, and spent about 20 minutes reading through the community guidelines and the relevant city ordinances. You have a solid case, she finally said, looking up from the papers. The HOA's rule about snow removal hours directly conflicts with the city's requirement for prompt snow removal. The fact that you were clearing your driveway to comply with your work obligations and to ensure you could safely navigate during a snow emergency makes your position even stronger. So what do we do? I asked. First, we send one more letter to the HOA, laying out your legal position in more formal terms. This gives them a chance to back down without going to court. If they refuse, we file a lawsuit in small claims court to contest the fine. In Wisconsin, small claims court can handle disputes up to $10,000, so your $250 fine definitely qualifies. How much is this going to cost me? I asked, because that was the obvious concern. Helen smiled slightly. My retainer for something like this is $1,500. If we win, we can petition the court to award attorney's fees and court costs to you, which means the HOA would have to pay. If we lose, you're out my fee plus the fine. But based on what I'm seeing here, I'd say we have better than even odds of winning. I thought about it for maybe 30 seconds. Let's do it. Helen drafted a letter that was everything mine had been, but with the added weight of legal letterhead and proper citations to case law. She sent it to the HOA board with a 2-week deadline to withdraw the fine or we'd file suit. The 2 weeks passed with no response. On the 16th day, Helen filed the lawsuit. Isaac Morrison vs. Ridgewood Estates Homeowners Association, Milwaukee County Small Claims Court. The notice of the lawsuit must have hit the HOA like a bomb. 3 days after we filed, my phone rang at 8 in the evening. It was Patricia Whitmore. "Mr. Morrison," she said, her voice cold and clipped. "I'm calling regarding the frivolous lawsuit you've filed against the Homeowners Association." "It's not frivolous," I said calmly. "Your rule violates city ordinance." "That's not for you to decide," Patricia snapped. "What you're doing is wasting the association's money on legal fees when those funds could be used for community improvements. You're being selfish and petty." "I cleared my driveway to get to work," I said. "You fined me $250 for being responsible." "If anyone's being petty, it's the HOA." "We could have worked this out if you'd been reasonable," Patricia said. "But now you've forced us to hire an attorney to defend against your lawsuit. That's money coming out of the association's budget, which means it's coming from your neighbors' pockets." "You could have worked it out by withdrawing an unjust fine," I countered. "My attorney gave you 2 weeks to do the right thing. You chose not to." Patricia's voice dropped to something that sounded almost threatening. "You're going to regret this, Mr. Morrison. This neighborhood has a long memory." She hung up before I could respond. I sat there for a moment, holding my phone, feeling a mix of anger and unease. Was I doing the right thing? Was this worth the fight? Then I thought about Patricia's tone, the implied threat, the suggestion that my neighbors would somehow turn against me for standing up for myself. That's when I knew I was absolutely doing the right thing. Bullies only win when people are too afraid to fight back. The court date was set for 6 weeks later, in early March. In the meantime, life in Ridgewood Estates became noticeably chillier, and I don't mean because of the weather. My neighbor to the right, a friendly guy named Tom who I'd had beers with a few times, suddenly became very busy whenever I saw him outside. The woman across the street stopped waving when she drove by. At the mailbox one afternoon, another neighbor, a middle-aged woman named Carol, actually said to me, "I hope you know what you're doing, taking on the HOA like this. They don't forget." But not everyone shunned me. About a week before the court date, my doorbell rang at 7 in the evening. I opened it to find 3 of my neighbors standing on my porch. The older man who had patted my shoulder at the meeting, a younger couple from the end of the street, and a woman I recognized from the neighborhood but had never actually talked to. "Mr. Morrison," the older man said, extending his hand. "I'm Robert Chen. We met briefly at the board meeting. These are David and Jennifer Walsh, and this is Martha Kozlowski. We wanted to talk to you about your lawsuit." I invited them in, suddenly nervous. Were they here to pressure me to drop the case? We settled in my living room and Robert got right to the point. We want you to know that not everyone in this neighborhood thinks you're wrong. In fact, we think what you're doing is important. Jennifer Walsh nodded enthusiastically. The HOA has been getting more and more controlling over the past few years. Patricia Whitmore treats this place like her personal fiefdom. Someone needs to stand up to her. We were wondering, Martha Kozlowski said quietly, if you'd mind if we came to the court hearing to support you. We think the judge should see that this isn't just about you, it's about how the HOA treats all of us. I felt something loosen in my chest, a tension I hadn't fully realized I'd been carrying. I would really appreciate that, I said. Thank you. We talked for another hour. It turned out that Patricia and the board had been heavy-handed with lots of residents over the years. Robert had been fined for having his trash cans visible from the street 15 minutes before the allowed time. The Walshes had been threatened with legal action because their mailbox post was painted white instead of the approved shade of cream. Martha had been cited for having a garden gnome in her flower bed that violated the guidelines against decorative lawn statuary. The thing is, David Walsh said, most people just pay the fines and move on because it's easier than fighting. But it's gotten to the point where we're paying dues for an association that does nothing but harass us. What about the board elections? I asked. Can't you vote Patricia out? Robert shook his head. She's been president for 8 years. Every election, she runs unopposed because anyone who tries to run against her gets targeted with violations and fines until they give up. It's basically become a dictatorship. The court date arrived on a Wednesday morning. Helen Sanders met me at the Milwaukee County Courthouse at 8:30. It was a gray, slushy day, that miserable kind of late winter weather where the snow is half melted and everything is dirty and wet. To my surprise and deep gratitude, Robert, Martha, and the Walshes were already there, along with 4 other neighbors I recognized. They'd taken time off work to come support me. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, more like a conference room with a judge's bench at one end. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Judge Catherine Brennan, who had a reputation, Helen told me, for being fair but no nonsense. Patricia Whitmore arrived with the HOA's attorney, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit named Richard Thornton. Patricia looked furious when she saw the small group of neighbors sitting in the gallery. The hearing began at 9. Helen presented our case first, methodically laying out the timeline. The snowstorm, my early morning snow removal, the fine, my attempts to resolve the matter, and finally the legal argument that the HOA's rule conflicted with municipal ordinance. Your Honor, Helen said, the city of Milwaukee requires property owners to clear snow from their sidewalks within 12 hours of the snow stopping. The storm in question ended at approximately 6 in the morning. That means Mr. Morrison had until 6 in the evening to clear his sidewalk. However, Mr. Morrison also had a work obligation that required him to leave his home by 7 in the morning. To meet both his municipal obligation and his work requirement, he needed to clear his driveway early. The HOA's rule prohibiting snow removal before 8 in the morning created an impossible situation. Richard Thornton, the HOA's attorney, stood up with a confident smile. Your Honor, the HOA's rule and the city ordinance address different issues. The city ordinance concerns sidewalk safety. The HOA rule concerns community peace and quiet. There is no actual conflict. Mr. Morrison could have complied with both by clearing his sidewalk later in the day and making alternative transportation arrangements for his work meeting. Alternative transportation arrangements, Helen shot back. In the middle of a snowstorm. Your Honor, The HOA is essentially arguing that Mr. Morrison should have called a cab or rideshare service at his own expense, rather than clearing his own driveway at his own property. That's not reasonable. Judge Brennan held up a hand. Let me ask a question. Miss Sanders, is there anything in the city ordinance that specifically addresses the hours during which snow removal must take place? No, Your Honor, Helen said. The ordinance simply requires removal within 12 hours. However, the ordinance's purpose is public safety, and that purpose is best served by prompt removal, not delayed removal. Mr. Thornton, the judge turned to the HOA's attorney, can you show me where in the Wisconsin statutes an HOA is permitted to enforce rules that impede a resident's compliance with municipal law? Thornton shuffled his papers. Your Honor, the HOA has broad authority under state law to enforce community standards. The rule in question is reasonable and applied equally to all residents. That doesn't answer my question, Judge Brennan said sharply. I'm familiar with Wisconsin Statute 703.15, which addresses conflicts between HOA rules and municipal ordinances. The statute is quite clear that municipal law takes precedence when there's a conflict. So I'll ask you again, how is the HOA's rule not in conflict with the city's snow removal ordinance? Thornton opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. The conflict isn't direct, Your Honor. The rules address different aspects of property maintenance. But they both concern the same action, removing snow, the judge said. And the HOA's rule restricts when that action can be taken, while the city's ordinance requires it to be taken promptly. That sounds like a conflict to me. I watched Patricia's face turn red. She leaned over and whispered something urgently to Thornton, who nodded and whispered back. Your Honor, Thornton said, the HOA would like to point out that Mr. Morrison could have requested a variance for his specific circumstances. The community guidelines include a provision for hardship variances. Helen was on her feet immediately. Your Honor, the hardship variance provision requires written application at least 30 days in advance of the requested variance. Mr. Morrison couldn't have known 30 days in advance that there would be a snowstorm requiring him to clear his driveway before 8 in the morning. The HOA is arguing that residents should request variances for weather events they can't predict. Judge Brennan looked at Thornton with something that might have been amusement or irritation. Is that your position, counselor? That residents should apply for snow removal variances before they know if it's going to snow? No, Your Honor, Thornton said quickly. But the broader point is that the HOA has legitimate authority to regulate noise and disturbances in the community. Using a shovel to clear snow is not a noise disturbance, Helen interjected. If Mr. Morrison had been using a snowblower at 5 in the morning, that might be different. But hand shoveling is a normal, necessary activity that produces minimal noise. Judge Brennan made some notes, then looked up. I want to hear from Mr. Morrison directly. Mr. Morrison, please approach. I stood up, my legs feeling shaky, and walked to the front of the courtroom. Helen gave me an encouraging nod. Mr. Morrison, Judge Brennan said, tell me exactly what happened that morning. What time did you start shoveling? How long did it take? And what tools did you use? I took a breath. Your Honor, I started shoveling at approximately 5 in the morning. I used a standard snow shovel, the kind you can buy at any hardware store. It took me about an hour and 15 minutes to clear my driveway and the sidewalk in front of my property. I wasn't talking loudly, I wasn't playing music. I was just shoveling as quietly as I could so I could get to my car and drive to work. And you had a work meeting that morning? The judge asked. Yes, Your Honor. A client meeting downtown at 7:30. I'm an accountant, and this was during tax season. Missing that meeting could have cost me a significant client. Did any of your neighbors complain about the noise you made while shoveling? Not to my knowledge, Your Honor. The complaint came from Mrs. Whitmore, the HOA president who lives 3 houses down from me. I don't believe she could have heard me shoveling from that distance. Judge Brennan turned to Patricia. Mrs. Whitmore, did you personally hear Mr. Morrison shoveling that morning? Patricia stood up, her voice icy. I saw him from my window, Your Honor. Whether I heard him is irrelevant. The rule exists and he violated it. Actually, whether you heard him is quite relevant, the judge said. If the purpose of the rule is to prevent noise disturbances, but no one was actually disturbed, then the rule is being enforced punitively rather than for its stated purpose. That concerns me. Your Honor, Patricia said, her voice rising, if we allow exceptions every time someone has a work meeting or an appointment, the rule becomes meaningless. We have to enforce our guidelines consistently, or the entire community structure falls apart. Mrs. Whitmore, Judge Brennan said calmly, I understand the desire for consistent rule enforcement, but rules that conflict with municipal law or that prevent residents from complying with their legal obligations are not enforceable, no matter how consistently you try to apply them. The judge spent another 10 minutes asking questions, reviewing the documents Helen had submitted and examining the community guidelines. Finally, she sat back in her chair. I'm ready to rule, she said. After reviewing the evidence and the applicable law, I find in favor of Mr. Morrison. The HOA's rule restricting snow removal to the hours between 8 in the morning and 8 in the evening conflicts with the City of Milwaukee's snow removal ordinance, which requires prompt removal to ensure public safety. While I understand the HOA's desire to maintain peace and quiet in the community, that goal cannot override residents' obligations under municipal law or their reasonable need to access their vehicles for work and other essential activities. I felt Helen grip my arm, a silent gesture of victory. The fine of $250 is hereby vacated, Judge Brennan continued. Furthermore, I am ordering the Ridgewood Estates Homeowners Association to revise Section 7.4, Paragraph C of its community guidelines to bring it into compliance with municipal ordinances. The revised rule must include reasonable provisions for snow removal at any hour when necessary to comply with city requirements or to address safety concerns. Patricia made a sound like she'd been slapped. Additionally, the judge said, looking directly at Patricia now, I am awarding attorney's fees and court costs to Mr. Morrison to be paid by the Homeowners Association. Miss Sanders, please submit your fee statement within 14 days. Yes, Your Honor, Helen said, not bothering to hide her smile. One more thing, Judge Brennan added. Mrs. Whitmore, I want to be very clear about this. If Mr. Morrison or any other resident of Ridgewood Estates faces retaliation from the HOA as a result of this lawsuit, I will consider that a violation of this court's order. Do you understand? Patricia's face was purple now. Yes, Your Honor, she said through clenched teeth. The hearing was over. Helen and I walked out of the courtroom, followed by my neighbors who were grinning and congratulating me. Robert Chen shook my hand vigorously. You did it, he said. You actually beat them. We did it, I corrected. Thank you all for being here. It meant a lot to have support. Helen and I walked to a coffee shop a block from the courthouse to discuss the details. She was clearly pleased with the outcome. That went better than I expected, she said. Judge Brennan didn't just rule in your favor, she ordered the HOA to change their rules. That's significant, and the attorney's fees award means you're not out any money. How much will the HOA have to pay? I asked. My bill will be around $2,000, including court costs, Helen said. But the real cost to them is the precedent. Other residents now know they can challenge unfair rules. Patricia Whitmore's grip on that community just got a lot weaker. I got home that afternoon feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The victory wasn't just about the money or even about the snow removal rule. It was about standing up to a bully and winning. It was about proving that unreasonable authority could be challenged. But I should have known it wouldn't be that simple. Over the next few weeks, life in Ridgewood Estates was tense. Patricia and the HOA board did revise the snow removal rule, though their new version was clearly written with maximum resentment. The revised rule allowed snow removal at any hour when necessary to comply with municipal ordinances or to address immediate safety concerns. But it was accompanied by stern warnings about unnecessary noise and consideration for neighbors. Then, about a month after the court hearing, I started getting violation notices. Lots of them. My trash can was visible from the street for more than 2 hours after collection. My lawn exceeded the maximum allowed height by half an inch. There was a small oil stain on my driveway that violated appearance standards. My mailbox was slightly faded and needed repainting. Each violation came with a fine. $50 here, $75 there. Within 3 weeks, I'd racked up over $400 in fines. I called Helen. "They're retaliating," I told her. "Just like the judge warned them not to," Helen sighed. "I was afraid of this. Document everything. Take photos with timestamps. Keep every notice. We may need to go back to court." But before we could take action, something unexpected happened. I got a call from David Walsh, one of my neighbors who had supported me at the hearing. "Isaac," he said, sounding excited, "you need to come to the community center tonight. There's an emergency HOA meeting and you need to be there." "What's going on?" I asked. "Just come," David said. "Trust me." I arrived at the community center at 7, the appointed time. The parking lot was packed, cars spilling out onto the street. Inside, the meeting room was standing room only. I'd never seen this many residents at an HOA meeting. There had to be at least 100 people there. Patricia and the board sat at their usual table at the front, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Patricia's face was tight, her usual confident demeanor replaced by something that looked like barely controlled panic. Robert Chen stood up. "This meeting has been called by petition of the residents, as is our right under the HOA bylaws. We have a motion on the floor to remove the current board and hold immediate elections for new leadership." The room erupted in applause. Patricia banged her gavel furiously. "This is highly irregular," she said, her voice shrill. "You can't just remove the board without cause." "We have cause," Martha Kozlowski said, standing up with a thick folder. "Over the past 3 years, this board has issued over 300 fines to residents for minor violations. Many of these fines appear to be retaliatory, targeting residents who have questioned board decisions. The board has also used HOA funds to pay legal fees for lawsuits that should never have been filed. We've lost the confidence of this community." Another resident stood up, a man I didn't recognize. "I've been fined 4 times in the past year for violations that were either trivial or completely fabricated. I'm not the only one. This board has turned our neighborhood into a police state." More people spoke up, sharing their stories of unfair fines, harassment, and vindictive enforcement of petty rules. The meeting lasted for almost 3 hours. In the end, the vote was overwhelming. Patricia Whitmore and her entire board were removed, effective immediately. Temporary officers were appointed to serve until proper elections could be held the following month. Robert Chen was appointed interim president. One of his first acts was to review all outstanding fines and violations. "We're going to approach this with common sense," Robert announced. "If a violation is legitimate and affects safety or property values, it stands. If it's petty, vindictive, or appears to be retaliation, it's dismissed. We're going to go through every fine issued in the past 2 years and make sure they were justified." My violations were among the first to be dismissed. So were dozens of others that the board had issued to residents who had supported me or who had spoken out at the meeting. The formal elections were held in April. Robert Chen ran for president unopposed and won. A slate of reform-minded residents was elected to the board. Their first major action was to conduct a comprehensive review of the community guidelines, eliminating rules that were overly restrictive, conflicted with local laws, or served no legitimate purpose. Patricia Whitmore tried to stay involved, showing up at meetings and making comments, but without her position of authority, her influence evaporated. Within 6 months, she and her husband sold their house and moved to a different neighborhood. I heard through the neighborhood rumor mill that she tried to join that HOA's board, but was rejected once they learned about her history. As for me, life in Ridgewood Estates improved dramatically. The new board operated transparently, held regular open meetings where residents could voice concerns, and enforced rules reasonably and fairly. The neighborhood, freed from constant harassment and petty fines, became more friendly and cohesive. One evening in late summer, I was out watering my lawn when David Walsh walked over with 2 beers. "Thought you might want one," he said, handing me a bottle. "Thanks," I said. We stood there in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sun set over the neighborhood. "You know," David said, "you filing that lawsuit was the best thing that could have happened to this place. It showed everyone that the HOA wasn't invincible, that unreasonable authority could be challenged. You started something." "I just didn't want to pay a stupid fine," I said, laughing. "Maybe," David said, "but you stood up when a lot of people would have backed down. That matters." I thought about that conversation a lot over the following months. It's easy to go along with unfair rules to pay the fines and avoid the conflict, to tell yourself that it's not worth the fight. But when enough people do that, bullies like Patricia Whitmore get to rule unchecked, turning communities into their personal kingdoms. Standing up to the HOA cost me time, stress, and initially some social isolation. But it also showed me that most people, when given a choice, will choose fairness over arbitrary authority. They just need someone to take the first step. The snow removal rule that had started everything became something of a legend in our neighborhood. The new board not only revised it to allow snow removal at any hour, but they added a provision encouraging residents to help elderly or disabled neighbors with snow removal as a community service. What had been a tool of control became a framework for cooperation. I kept Helen Sanders' business card in my wallet, though I never needed to call her again for HOA issues. The new board operated so transparently and reasonably that disputes were rare and usually resolved through simple conversation. That's what an HOA should be: a group of neighbors working together to maintain their community, not a power structure designed to control and punish. One December evening, almost a year after the lawsuit, we got another big snowstorm. I was out shoveling my driveway at 6 in the morning, getting ready for an early meeting, when I saw Robert Chen doing the same thing 3 houses down. We waved to each other, and he walked over once we'd both finished. "Remember when this was a crime?" He joked, gesturing at our cleared driveways. "Don't remind me," I said, shaking my head. "I still can't believe I got fined for this." "Well," Robert said, "your willingness to fight that fine changed this whole neighborhood for the better. So on behalf of everyone, thank you." Just doing what was right, I said. That's exactly the attitude we need more of, Robert said. As I drove to work that morning, my driveway clear and no threat of a fine hanging over my head, I reflected on the whole experience. It had taught me that standing up to unreasonable authority isn't just about the specific issue at hand. It's about the principle that rules should serve the community, not control it. It's about refusing to accept that those in power have the right to be arbitrary or punitive just because they hold a title. The lawsuit had cost the HOA not just the attorney's fees they had to pay me, but their reputation and, ultimately, their positions of authority. Patricia Whitmore had ruled Ridgewood Estates like a personal fiefdom for years, using fines and violations as weapons to keep residents in line. But when one person stood up and said, "This isn't right," and when that person had the law on his side, the whole structure crumbled. I never regretted filing that lawsuit, even during the stressful weeks when neighbors were avoiding me and the fines were piling up. Because the alternative was to live in a community where authority was never questioned, where unfair rules were enforced without mercy, and where speaking up meant being targeted for retaliation. The last I heard, Patricia had tried to get involved with her new HOA's board and had been quickly shut down when residents looked up her history. Turns out that the court case, being a matter of public record, followed her. Word travels fast in HOA circles, and nobody wanted to deal with someone who had been so publicly rebuked by a judge for overreaching authority. Meanwhile, Ridgewood Estates thrived under its new leadership. Property values actually increased because people wanted to live in a neighborhood known for reasonable governance rather than petty tyranny. The community fund, once depleted by unnecessary legal fees, was used for real improvements. New playground equipment, better street lighting, and a summer concert series that brought everyone together. Sometimes I still think about that morning, standing in the pre-dawn darkness, shoveling snow so I could get to work on time. I had no idea that simple, responsible action would lead to a lawsuit, a court victory, and ultimately the complete transformation of my neighborhood's governance. But that's the thing about standing up for what's right. You never know how far the ripples will spread. You just know that if you don't take that first step, nothing will ever change. And sometimes, one person with a snow shovel and a willingness to fight an unjust fine can make all the difference. The snow kept falling that winter, as it always does in Milwaukee. And every time I went out to clear my driveway, no matter what hour of the day or night, I did so knowing that I'd helped create a community where reasonable people could live without fear of arbitrary punishment. That was worth far more than the $250 fine I'd refused to pay. It was worth every minute of stress, every uncomfortable conversation, every moment of doubt, because in the end, I hadn't just won a lawsuit. I'd helped win back a community,